All right. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, Amesh. You're
Happy
my
Valentine.
Valentine today.
Yeah.
You're my Valentine today, uh, of the moment. Everyone wants to be with a doctor. Sorry if I began weirdly. So happy Valentine's Day. Welcome, everyone. Um, is it ever justifiable to restrict selfishness and individual freedom, restrict morally and or legally, for the sake of others, the public, the collective, the tribe, the web of life? Welcome, everyone, to this continuing series on introducing the ideas of Ayn Rand to people who may be to a degree aligned with her, who are pro individual flourishing and the job is enjoyment, but at the same time, who may support altruism, unselfishness, and collectivism, including many in the organic intelligence world. So, uh, is it justifiable to restrict selfishness and individual freedom for the sake of the tribe? With me to chat is my Valentine of the moment, Dr. Amesh Adalja. I'm Dr. Bach Ho. Dr. Adalja is a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. He is an infectious disease physician working on pandemic policy, emerging infections, and preventing bioterrorism. Board certified in internal medicine, emergency medicine, infectious diseases, and critical care medicine. Named one of Stat News's top 13 physicians to follow on Twitter/X. Blogging at trackingzebra.com. Uh, Amish, welcome. What does tracking zebra mean? Would you share with us?
So tracking zebra is sort of a term of art in the medical world. So in general, when you have students or trainees that are learning about medicine, they see a patient and they always come back to you invariably with some rare diagnosis. And you always tell the medical student, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But what I do in my field, in my interest, is not so much the horses, but the zebras and tracking those zebras before they become major problems. So that's what I do. I spend more time thinking about the odd things, the rare things versus the ordinary. So I'm tracking zebra. So that's where the name comes from.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to have you here. Uh, I followed you for a long time, and thank you for putting up with my sense of humor. It comes out naturally. Okay, so um, I would like to begin by telling you my favorite thing to do and seeing what you think. Amish, uh, my favorite thing to do is get sick with as many contagious diseases as possible. And then I like to go out into public, into densely crowded areas with vulnerable populations. The more vulnerable people, the better. And I like to get close to them and talk loudly with my mouth open, saliva flying out, coughing, sneezing, blowing my nose. That's my favorite thing to do in life. What would, and what would Ayn Rand say? I mean, Ayn Rand was pro-selfishness. You're sympathetic to her ideas. Be selfish, pursue your happiness. What would she think? If I may begin, I know it's an odd way to begin because I know most of the time you're talking about health and medicine, hardcore facts, but I just like to begin with an ethics angle. Uh, yes.
I think she would say, and I would say that you don't have the right to go and infect people. That if you are consciously spreading an infectious disease, that's initiating force against those people. And what you're describing is basically a small scale bioterrorist that goes around, infects themselves, gets infected with something, and then has the intention of spreading it to other people, especially people that might not be able to handle that infection if you're spreading it to vulnerable people. So I would say you're initiating force against those people by doing that.
Yes. And in Ayn Rand, for those who are somewhat new to Ayn Rand's ideas, Ayn Rand held that it is immoral to initiate physical force against other people. And Amish, you're saying that my going out and exposing people to my contagious disease counts as an act of initiation of force. She would be against it morally. You're against it morally. Uh, and you suggest it's a small act of bioterrorism, you said?
Yeah, if you infect yourself with something and you want to go now infect other people with the intention of them getting sick, of
Yes.
harming them, that to me is what, we talk about bioterrorist scenarios where a bioterrorist might infect themselves with smallpox and then go sit on a plane, and infect people with the deadly disease. So obviously, if you're doing this with respiratory viruses, you're not doing it with something on the scale of smallpox, but you're still doing that. That's still
Right.
going out there and terrorizing people by exposing them to an infection that you knowingly are doing with the intention of them contracting it and getting sick and harming them.
Thank you very much. I began with that hyperbolic example. I'd like to throw out a more garden example of life and see what you think. So just in ordinary living, people get uh, colds and flus, etc. And the question is, what is it moral to do when they're in that condition? Some people still go out in public, they go to restaurants, they get their hair cut, etc. And one view here is critical of the ethics of selfishness. One view here is, see, you can't be selfish all the time. There are limits. You may want to go out in public when you're sick and go to restaurants and shop and be with friends, but you have to limit your selfishness, and that's why it's important. Why unselfish concern for others is an important value many people hold, and you have to practice some unselfishness in living your life. That's common sense. That's plausible. Um, what do you think, Amesh, there?
So there's a couple of things. First of all, I think that when people live in a society where they're going to be interacting with each other, if you live in a big city, you are sort of implicitly consenting to some of the mild illnesses that are going to circulate in crowds. So coughs and colds and influenzas and even COVID now at this point, those are things that are part and parcel of socially interacting with individuals. And people have to have a risk tolerance if they're going to do that, or they can live in a place where they're isolated, or they can wear personal protective equipment like a mask when they're in those situations. So for many of these diseases that have relatively mild morbidity, mild mortality, that's sort of implicitly consented to. I know that I'm going to be exposed to these germs when I'm out in the mall or wherever it may be. There's a difference when it's something that's kind of a high consequence infectious disease, where tuberculosis, for example, would be a good example, where you're not really consenting to be exposed to tuberculosis. So if somebody's knowingly spreading tuberculosis, that's a different story of somebody knowingly spreading the common cold from a law or a legal standpoint or a public health authority standpoint. The other thing is I wouldn't put it as restraining your selfishness if you're not going out there and infecting other people. I think you have to think about what's in your long-term rational self-interest, and it's not to live in a society where people are going about infecting other people. And it's also not all or none. It's, can you wear a mask? Can you do this outdoors? Who are you going to be around? It's a different thing if you're going into a nursing home with immunocompromised people versus going to a bar where people have sort of implicitly consented to being exposed to certain things. So there's a lot more to it. It's not all or none. And
Yeah,
obviously, we live on a planet where there are many microorganisms, many infectious disease threats. Some of those are going to be things that you can't avoid experiencing. So I think that you
yeah.
have to really get into the very specifics before you actually can come up with a general rule, and it's going to vary from place to place. The context is going to set a lot of the tone of what's going on. But certainly, if you have tuberculosis and you're deciding to go out, that's a different story than if you've got the sniffles and you go out. That's a difference in degree. That's also a difference in kind.
Thank you. And I would like to continue focusing. I have questions mainly around the most fundamental ethical ideas. I have in mind an audience who's interested in Rand on selfishness and individual rights, and but somewhat sympathetic to the other side. So I want to focus on that core the core of ethics. So may I ask you outright, do you think people should always be selfish? I'm not wedding you to any particular, we'll get into details, but just as a general rule, do you think people should be selfish without compromise and never sacrifice their selfishness for the sake of unselfish concern? Do you hold that?
Yes, but I think it's
Okay.
important to recognize what
But
the concept of selfishness actually means, and that
yes.
long-term rational self-interest, not some kind of whim worship type of idea of selfishness, which is kind of what's caricatured in the or what the general public's understanding of that is.
Yes, thank you. I agree. And so um if someone has a normal cold or flu, may I use the word normal? Is that legitimate enough with you? Like just a normal cold and flu?
Yes.
Um, and they want to go out and to the mall, to restaurants, to Disneyland, knowing they may be infecting other people. It's Is it moral for them to do that anyway on grounds that selfishness is morally right?
Well,
Uh,
I would say if it's a minor illness like a quote unquote normal cold, the people that they're going to be exposing have implicitly consented to that. In terms of if you're going to Disneyland, you know you're going to be around people that may be sick. And
right.
so if it's a normal cold, I don't think that this is them. I think this is not anything other than this is not really a moral issue. I don't think it's immoral if you do that. I think that it all depends. It's all context driven, and it's not one size fits all. It all depends upon the risk involved and what the scenario is. So the same thing would be suppose you had that same scenario, and instead of going to Disneyland, you're going to see your grandmother who just is on chemotherapy from leukemia, and you don't tell her that you have the common cold, and you don't take any precautions. Then I think that rises to that becomes a moral question because you're knowingly endangering somebody without their consent, and you're going to their private home where they haven't consented to mix
Yeah.
with people. So that
Yeah.
there's a lot of differences between places where people mix publicly and what's implicitly consented to versus a private scenario. And I think that in general, the rule that I would recommend people do is if you are sick with something, even if it's a mild, normal cold, and you're going to someone's house or you're interacting with people, tell them, say, I have the cold. So that they have that ability to say, okay, I'd rather you not come. I'd rather we postpone this, or can you wear a mask, or I'm going to wear a mask, or let's do this outdoors instead of indoors, especially if that person has a high risk condition. But it's not, it's not going to be some ironclad rule that always applies irrespective of the context. There's a lot
Yeah.
that's at play here.
Thank you. I hear you on be careful about trying to have categorical ironclad rules. Context is important. Um, I'd like to continue focusing on fundamental ethics. Let me know if I'm starting to irritate you, but I'm trying to think about opponents of Rand's philosophy and what Rand would say also. So I'm with you in. Uh, um, so you said if it's a context where you're going to see a relative and they're immunocompromised and that could really hurt them, you said then it becomes a moral question or issue. Whereas in a apart from that context, dealing with healthy people at Disneyland or whatever, it's not a moral question. Now, I wonder if you were when you said that the case with the grandma is a moral question arises. I wonder if someone would say you're using moral in a way that implicitly endorses altruism. You're using it to mean moral is other regarding, and so you say it's a moral context, and wouldn't whereas isn't the correct morality according to Ayn Rand's objectivism selfishness? So it's not that there are certain situations that are moral, and those would be the other regarding situations, and other situations that would not be moral situations or moral questions. Would you speak? I don't know how clear I'm being. I'm sorry, but
Well, so I think I understand the
yeah,
question. So,
yeah,
but the reason I'm saying that becomes a moral issue because number one, it's not in your rational self-interest to harm somebody unknowingly, like that doesn't consent to being exposed to a common cold or a flu in their private residence. You're going there and you're spreading, you maybe exposing them to danger. That's why that's one thing. The other thing is that it's not something that's in your rational self-interest to harm people that you care about or that are values to you. That's not going to be in
Yeah, yeah,
your interest to do so. So it's kind of the bridge between morality and politics here, where you're initiating force on someone if you're exposing them to an infectious disease in their private home in a situation where they're not expecting to be. And all it takes is just to tell them, hey, I've got the cold. I've got a common cold. Do you want me to come over or not? That's what
right.
it's not a big lift. And as long as people are consenting to these things and knowing that this is going to happen, I don't think that it rises to the level of a moral issue. But the key thing is you
Yeah,
need to
okay.
disclose your status. If you're going to put them at risk for something, you need to tell them that you're going to put them at risk when they're in, some kind of private setting. It's very different if someone consents. They're out in the door, they're in the marketplace. That's a different story because they know that there's some risk baked in to being out there, that they're going to be around other people. It's very different if you're going to visit someone in a specific situation where it's not a public venue.
Okay, so one thing you're saying, I think, is that the wrongness of harming others and putting others at risk of harm is grounded in the ethics of rational self-interest, not in an ethics of unselfishness. I think that's one thing you're saying, yeah.
Yes.
And that in public, people consent to the risk of colds and flus, and because they implicitly consent, you're in the clear to put them at risk. Whereas in private residences, they don't implicitly consent. Period. Is that
Correct. They're not
yeah,
expecting to be exposed to things. Obviously, if they're having a party or something like that, that's a different story. But if you're going to visit somebody, um, you kind of have to assume that they're assuming that you should disclose that you're sick. That's just the
thank you.
simple
Okay.
the simple maxim that I put in that I think is a good rule to follow. And it's very different when people are out there because they know that they're going to be exposed to things. Everybody know it's baked into the idea that you're socially interacting with people.
Yeah,
People say,
yeah,
I've just been on, it's very common. I was just in there. As people say, I traveled, I just took 5 different flights. I'm sure I'm going to come down with something. They know that there's that risk out there. That's well advertised. That's well incorporated into people's risk calculations when they go out in daily life, that they know it might rain. They know they might get splashed with mud. They know they
yeah,
might sprain their ankle walking off of a curb. That's all part of interacting with the world and being in social environments or public environments. It's very different if you're going to somebody's house or you're going to you're at a specific type of private event and you're going
yeah,
there to spread something. And obviously, if you're in public, suppose you're at Disney World and you've got the cold, you shouldn't go around licking people or anything like that either. You shouldn't be
yeah.
coughing and sneezing. It just means,
Yes,
yes, you have this out there. You still should be very prudent about what you're doing, washing your hands and being careful,
yeah,
so you're not actually spreading it. You don't want to overtly try and spread it, but obviously, uh, it's not something. It's not going to be something you can 100% decrease the contagiousness of if you're in a public setting. But I think
yeah.
it's to me, the big thing is that when you're in society, you are going to get these crowd diseases, that they're going to be part of what you do. And it's not, this is something that people can incorporate into their daily risk calculations when they step out the door.
Okay. I think thank you. I think people who are um not too sympathetic to Ayn Rand's morality of selfishness uh, may say the following. Amesh, many of your concrete pieces of advice, warn people if you're sick, decide whether to wear a mask or not, make judgments about whether it's a public event or a private event, what kind of event is it, be context sensitive. Many of those, a lot of that advice, I think is very good, common sense, plausible, the right way to live. But I think the devil's advocate, I think the it's a bit of a strain or implausible to ground that advice on grounds of rational self-interest as opposed to the ground of sometimes you just do have to be unselfish. What if I mean, I'm sick, but I want to go to a party and I just don't care about other people very much. I want to go to the party and drink and have fun, and I'm going to not tell anyone I'm sick. And couldn't that be in my rational self-interest? And therefore, grounding your very good, plausible, common sense advice in rational self-interest seems implausible, and we have to bring in some goodness of altruism to limit selfishness. They might. So, could you comment on it? And if I know I may have asked that in different ways before in our conversation
Well,
so
so,
far.
so if you're going to go to a party like that, sick, is it in your rational self? You presumably wanting to go there for comradeship and to be around friends and people you value. Is it in your self-interest to harm them? That's what I would say.
Okay.
Is that what you would do to people that you
Um.
supposedly value, that you would harm them?
Okay.
That's how I would put it. Like, why would you be treating them like an enemy, that you're going to do something that actively harm them? And the alternative in that party thing is just tell people, I'm sick. Do you still want me to come or not? But the other point is just why do you want to harm people with something that how can that be in your self interest if you're looking at self
Oh.
interest long term? Okay, maybe you get to go to this party in the next 24 hours, but what happens if your friends are like, we're all sick, you shouldn't have come, we don't like you anymore, you exposed us to harm and you didn't like that's not in your self, that can't be seen in your self interest if you're thinking about it long terms. And it's just like, I mean, you could take the same idea of, you're driving why do you drive when you drive a car, why do you not drive recklessly? Is that altruism, that you're not driving recklessly, or is that just because it's in your self-interest to be on a roadway where people are driving orderly, and you want to be part of that, or that orderly driving? That's how I would think about it. It's not that anything
Mhm.
that you do that restrains your whim means it's altruistic. I don't think that's the true, but because what you're talking about is not actually, it's not rational self-interest. It's not looking at your life long term, not even looking at it even a week in advance. If you're thinking about, making people sick, it has to be conceptualized that that self-interest doesn't mean following every whim and emotional drive you got. You have to actually think, is this actually something that's good for my life in its totality over time? Not just, is this some momentary lapse? I think that what you're
Okay.
doing is kind of juxtaposing, you're using whim and self-interest kind of interchangeably, and they're very different things.
I hear you. Um. Let me push back as devil's advocate. Yes, Amish, I understand that there's a distinction between rational long-term self-interest and that you're saying that selfishness refers to rational long-term self-interest in line with Ayn Rand's philosophy, and 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 that's contrasted against whim worship, which refers to following my desires of the moment, whatever they happen to be. And I'm saying that it I'm not into whim worship. I'm not into following my desires, whatever they happen to be. I'm into thinking long term. And let me just come at you with just something provocative. Okay, I want to go to a party and have sex with hot chicks or hot guys, and that's what I want. I don't care about them. I'm not looking for friendship or long term thing. And maybe I'm sick. Oh, well, why don't I just bring this in? Maybe I have herpes or HIV, and that's an issue in the gay male community, especially. Well, it's an issue in general, but highly prevalent in the gay male community. Do I reveal that I have AIDS or HIV? And I am pursuing my rational long-term self-interest in the sense that I want the pleasure from the party. I want sexual pleasure. I I don't personally care about the long-term well-being of the people I may be harming. But here I am. I'm going to pursue my rational self-interest anyway and go to the party and put people at risk. But I thought about it. It's not like I'm just arbitrarily immediately following my desires. I thought about my long-term self-interest, and that involves enjoying life, going to parties, trying to get sex, even if I'm putting people at risk. I don't desire. There's not primary desire to harm them. That's just a risk I'm fine taking for the sake of my long-term rational self-interest. You know.
Yeah, I just think that person would be completely misconceptualizing what's in their rational self-interest. They're uh, uh, evading what they're actually doing, that they're initiating force, that they're harming people, even if that's not their intention. Just like it might not be your intention to harm people if you get behind the wheel of a car when you're drunk. That might not be your intention. You just want to get to point A to point B.
Yeah.
That's what I would analogize it to. That if you are consciously going to spread a disease, even if that's not your primary intention, you know that that's a real possibility, and you don't consent people. You don't declare that that's what you're doing. It's the same thing as driving while intoxicated. That's not your intention to wreck into other people, but it's a real possibility. based on what you're trying to what the scenario you're setting up. So I would say that this is, akin to initiating force or being, very reckless, in a sense that it's showing disregard for the risk you might be posing and the indirect or direct force that might be being initiated against other people when you do something
Yeah.
like that. So I can't think that that can be in your rational self-interest to be in a situation or a society where that type
Okay.
of thing is not considered, that's considered somehow in your self-interest. You're not actually thinking, is it in my self-interest to be in a society where this is the kind of the norm that people can initiate force on other people, even if they don't mean to, but they're just going to be reckless enough that maybe that side of a well appreciated side effect of whatever activity they're going to do is that some people might get harmed, and those people don't know they're not consenting to be harmed.
Oh, okay, right. So I think, sorry if I interrupt. So you're saying one thing you're saying is it's not in your it's not in your long-term rational self-interest to live in a society where people can initiate force against each other, right? And thus, you're obligated to, well, not initiate force against other people, and uh, to to provide uh, information to them when it's relevant to their consent. And if you don't, that counts as initiation of force.
Right.
Is
Each
that?
person is an
Thank you.
autonomous being. They
Yes.
have the right to liberty. They have the right to be free from the initiation of physical force. And you're going to say, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I don't care about their right to be free from the initiation of force. I'm going to do what I do, and if force gets initiated and I infect them with herpes or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. That can't be that's not that you're basically saying I don't care if I violate their individual rights. So that means you don't care about individual rights. That means you don't respect individual rights. So and
Yeah.
how can advocating a world in which individual rights aren't respected, how can that be in your rational self-interest? It can't be.
Thank you. Oh, I want to ask you about that, but there's so many questions. Um, you're saying if someone has, would you say if someone has a sexually transmitted disease, they are obligated to inform sexual partners of that? Otherwise, that counts as an initiation of physical force.
If they're contagious. Obviously, there you know
Oh,
there are
yeah,
sexually
sorry.
transmitted infections that can be treated with drugs. So, for example, HIV, U equals U, undetectable viral load, untransmittable. You can't transmit HIV if you have an undetectable viral load, so you're not contagious. So you don't have an obligation to tell people your whole medical history. But if you are
Ah,
exposing that, if you are
okay.
contagious, if you have a disease that so for example, if you're not on HIV medications and you have HIV and you know your viral load is high, yes, that I think you would be obligated to tell someone that if they're not on, if you know that you might transmit to
Mm,
them.
mm.
So there are certain infectious diseases where you can control them, and we've made major strides in HIV. So if someone's viral load is controlled, they are not contagious to other people. That changes the equation. But there are sexually transmitted infections where you still might be contagious. So the issue is contagiousness rather than actual presence of the disease. That's the issue because if contagious is how one thing gets from one person to
Right,
another.
right, right,
That's
right.
the issue.
Okay, let me press you on this and compare it to um, the context so far has been infection that affects you physically harmfully. And I'm just curious about a neighboring situation, a neighboring case in dating. It's common for people to withhold information about themselves and maybe reveal it later. Like, let's say I have depression I have depression and I want to date, but I'm not going to tell when I'm online on the apps or whatever. I'm not going to share that with people. I'm going to go on the date and then get to know them and maybe reveal it later because if I reveal it too early, they may not have gone on a date with me. Now, if that's true, suppose if I tell some girl or guy in my case, suppose I have depression. I don't, but I withhold it from a guy online because I think he won't meet and date me if he knew. Does that count as some violation of an obligation to inform him so he can have consent to meet with me or not? Does it count as initiation of force, and why not? Why or why not? I'm just asking for thinking about that case in relation to the main case of these physically harmful contagious diseases.
Well, I think that's the issue. Is it contagious? You can't initiate force but that's an initiation of force when you literally are basically you have to think about an infectious disease as you literally launching missiles off of yourself onto somebody else. That's That's how that force is being initiated. That's not the same thing as if you don't disclose your your depression diagnosis, because that's not contagious. I mean, there may be issues there with honesty and other moral issues about that, but it's not the same thing as initiating force, because you're not talking about a
Okay.
contagious
Okay.
disease. This can't get from one person to another person.
So there may be some immorality in withholding information in other like withholding my, let's say I have a depression diagnosis. But what's one unique and a really important factor here is that in the context of contagious diseases, we're talking about the initiation of physical force, not merely dishonesty or deception. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I ask you about why exactly, what exactly is the ground for the wrongness of initiating physical force from an objectivist perspective? I have heard two interpretations here within objectivism. I just want to offer them to you and see what you think. One is that um, it's it's wrong to why should I respect other people's rights? Why should I not initiate force against them? The answer is because egoism or selfishness is the right moral code for every individual. When you join into society, the application of egoism to society, it involves everyone has to allow everyone else to be selfish and therefore not initiate physical force. That's one view I've heard. And where that view leaves open that in some sense, maybe it would be in your rational self-interest to initiate force, but that just has to be limited because if everyone has the right to be selfish, you just have to enforce a non-initiation of force on society. I don't know how
So
clear it.
I wouldn't put it that way.
Okay, okay,
I
okay.
would say that, how do, you're a human being. How do human beings live? Human beings live by their mind, by using their mind, the rational faculty. That's the human means of survival, is using your
Yeah.
mind. What is the only thing that can stop your mind? It's force. Force is anti-mind. So that's why the initiation of force is evil, because you're actually destroying somebody's means of survival. If you're initiating physical force, people are out there in wilderness trying to live, going about life, and you using their mind, and you're initiating force against them. You're stopping their ability to be human. It's not just a political issue. It's a moral issue, that when you initiate force against somebody, you are basically eliminating their way to be human, to use the products of their mind. So
Uh,
I think that that's how I would put it, is that I think that force is anti-mind. Mind is the way that humans survive. Humans could not survive if initiation of force, or flourish if initiation of force was widespread. And certainly when you live in obviously, if egoism is good for you, it's going to be good. It's a universal good, but that's
I,
not the reason why. I think it's deeper than that. It's basically severing your ability to survive. That's what you're doing, and destroying their right to live if you're initiating force against them. And obviously, I'm an infectious disease doctor. I'm not a philosopher, so I may get some of these details wrong, and I
no,
would defer to a PhD philosopher on this. But that's my understanding of this.
thank you, Amesh. No, I'm fine with but I appreciate you're willing to be a philosopher today, in addition to an infectious disease specialist. I'll get back to your primary specialty in a moment, but if I could do one more on this, that I follow you. You've presented a standard objectivist position. The initiation of physical force against someone is anti-mind. You're destroying their ability to survive. The devil's advocate may say here, yes, you're destroying them, you're destroying their mind, you're destroying their ability to survive. But how does that connect to you and your self-interest? Wouldn't an objectivist have to connect the harm to another person's mind to harm to that person who initiated force?
What's to stop somebody from doing that to you?
Right. Okay. So we're back. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Good. Okay. That's good. That's fine with. I'm happy with the period on that one. Okay. So a contagious disease breaks out. I'm going to go straight into your specialty here. The government wants to enforce lockdowns, have mask mandates. Could you comment? I know you've answered this a million times, but could you just comment for me? And yeah.
So again, this is all going to be very context dependent
Yeah.
and what's going on. And the COVID example is not the best one because there was a lot of things that happened that put us in a very bad situation where those blunt tools were all that certain governors thought they could use. But so let's just take it on a case by on a very simple basis. So you've got a person with tuberculosis, active tuberculosis, that you've told them you need to stay home until you've been on medications for so long so that you're not contagious. That person ignores that order, continues to go out and expose people and create this risk. Does the government have the ability to say we're going to now isolate you in your house and we're going to keep a police car outside of your house? Yes, he does. They do. Um, and so that's where that comes from, this idea of isolation. So what you need to do is isolate the people that are contagious, that pose a risk to other people. That's what you need to do. Or not, it's not something that should be blanket. But in order to do that, you have to know who is contagious and who is not. In COVID, we were flying blind because we did not have the ability to test because of lots of bad decisions that were made in January, February, and half of March of 2020. And you had a situation where hospitals in New York City, for example, were on the brink of collapse. So there needed to be some kind of short circuit, and that's why they did that. Not saying that it's justifiable or that it would
Oh,
be
yeah.
the ideal thing, but the key thing is, yes, you have the government has police power or should have police power to isolate those individuals who pose a risk to other individuals. That's always been a police. They've done it with smallpox. They've done it they've done it with plague. They've done it with tuberculosis. You have that ability and you ratchet it up. It's not the first thing you do. But what happens during COVID, if that's the example that people kind of that comes the most to mind, is that you had no way of telling who was infected, who was not, who was contagious, who was not. And you had hospitals on the brink of collapse. And you had governors that basically panicked and they issued these blanket blunt tools because they weren't able to do precision guided testing, tracing, isolating, because that time basically they blew all of that time through the early couple months of 2020, and those blunt tools were there. And no, I don't think that this was the correct policy, but I understand where that policy came from and why it happened. And I understand that, and I also know that there are cases where you can isolate somebody when they're posing a risk to others. Typhoid Mary is another good example from history where, because of her repeated behaviors, repeated violations, do not work as a cook because you are contagious with typhoid fever, and she continued to ignore that, so she eventually was isolated on North Brother Island.
You work in pandemic policy, and uh, the ground for government action in regard to contagious diseases from an objectivist perspective, and so from your perspective, would be to protect individual rights, which is different from a ground of to protect public welfare or public health or the general good. I'm wondering if you, and since you work in this area deeply, I'm wondering if you could comment on your colleagues who may lean more, if you have colleagues who lean more altruist collectivist, how do they understand this public good, public welfare, and how does it differ from an individual rights ground for pandemic policy? Could you
Well,
speak
there
to
are
that?
many people in my field who use the concept of population health, the health of populations, and they will often say that we need to do this for the good of the population, meaning that you frustrate some people's ability to, do something, but in the end, you have a better outcome for the entire population. So they will often make the individual subordinate to the population that they come from or the community that they're in. And I think that's kind of standard boilerplate collectivism, where that
Yeah.
individual might be stifled by that community. But what I would say is that when you're thinking about this properly, individual health and population health integrate, because a population is made up of individuals, and that the sum of those individuals' well-being, is sort of what you're looking at when you're thinking about population health. And you can't kind of elevate population health over the individuals that are in it. Society is made up, an abstraction. It's not a real thing, a population or a society. So in my mind, I think you have to integrate these two things together, and ideally it always should be integrated, that what is good for the individual is going to be good for the population if you've actually conceptualized it
Okay.
appropriately. So getting a vaccination, if barring any kind of weird side effects or predisposition to some side, getting a vaccination in a person benefits that person because they're protected from that disease and they live in a society which now has more immunity in that society. So both of those two things integrate. So I think that often gets squared off as a false alternative because people have misconceptualized how to think about these issues and think that, individual health and population health can sometimes be opposed. And I don't really think that that's the case if you actually drill into it and actually look at it with the proper context and looking at it kind of in a proper
Okay.
long-term
Okay.
fashion.
So you're saying a collectivist would hold that population health or what's good for a population is what, or a community is what is primary, and and individual health may need to be sacrificed for the sake of the population health. And well, you're against that and think it's a misconceptualization. You think individual health must be integrated with population health, and population health is a function, or it will arises from, is the result of focusing on individual health. Am I getting you correctly?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and one of the ways that they get muddled is they think, okay, well, we're going to fluoridate the public water supply, so we'll have less dental disease. That's not an individual. Everybody's getting it. So they don't, so they think that's a population health intervention. But if you actually drill into it, yeah, it is a population health intervention, but it actually benefits the individuals that are drinking from that public water. So sometimes I think they just muddle the way they think about this. Like when they think about
Okay.
they think about they think about an intervention that everybody gets, and then they call that a population health intervention, and then they kind of forget the fact, or they don't go back, they don't kind of shuttle back down and realize, well, who's actually benefiting from the fluoride? It's not, the city of Pittsburgh,
No,
it's
no.
the citizens of Pittsburgh that are benefiting from it. So I think they sometimes muddle that in their thinking, saying, well, we're doing population, we're not just giving people fluoride prescriptions, we're just putting it in the water. That's a population health intervention, very effective. It helps the whole population. But they kind of sometimes drop the individual out of that, and I don't think they mean to. I think
Yeah.
it's more sloppy thinking about how they've kind of conceptualized
I
something as like an individual health intervention is something your doctor, your dentist does for you. He prescribes you fluoride toothpaste or fluoride mouthwash. A population intervention is we just do this for the whole community. We just put the fluoride in the water.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And they think of those two things as opposed, and then they favor the population health intervention, not realizing that that still trickles its way down to the individuals who are drinking that water and getting
well,
that fluoride benefit.
yeah. A population is a population of individuals,
Right.
right? And I know I'm the one with the PhD in philosophy, and you've said that your specialty is infectious diseases, not philosophy. But I wanted to ask you some philosophical questions. But I think that because first of all, you are trained in Ayn Rand's objectivism, and I think we all have to be philosophers to a degree. So may I just ask, um, I don't. Okay, do you think? Well, I'll just tell you my own opinion that I'll focus on me. Right. I don't think populations or communities or collectives can be harmed or benefited, have health or ill health. Thinking in terms of what's good for the public or what's good for the collective or what's good for society is actually unintelligible because it's not a living thing, and only an individual can be harmed or benefited. A community or population, I think, cannot be harmed or benefited. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, but what do you think of that?
I think that that's essentially right. That you can't, the population as is an abstraction. It doesn't exist, and it doesn't have it's not a concrete thing to say,
Mm,
the population. It's, society itself doesn't exist. It's an abstraction. It's made up of the individuals. So yes, but people get sloppy with their thinking, and you can say, yeah, it's better to live in a city where there's high levels of population immunity to measles because that means that society is going to be more resilient to measles. But what that actually means is it's good to live in a society where the individuals have high levels of immune. Each individual is immunized against measles. That's what that actually means. People get a little sloppy and loose with the words, and they talk about the population, saying, "Oh, this city the state of Pennsylvania has a high vaccination rate. The population of Pennsylvania has a high vaccination rate. The population of South Carolina has a lower vaccination rate, and therefore." they think of it that way. They don't actually think of it as the individuals in that society. I
Yeah,
guess the larger point is that it's definitely true that living in a place where most people are healthy, that are up to date on their vaccinations, is going to be better for a person. So that population health of a given place might be better, but that what that really drills into is the individuals living there are healthier, and that's preferable
yeah.
than them not being healthier. But it's not the population as such that's healthy or unhealthy. It is the individuals that live in that area that constitute the population. You have to think of population as an abstraction in a shorthand way of thinking about the actual individuals there. But all of the harm and benefit occurs at the individual level. You can't harm an abstraction.
Yes. Uh, so people's thinking is muddled when they talk about population health, what's good for the population, without clearly, explicitly, fully meaning the health of particular individuals, because only those things can be healthy or unhealthy, right?
Right. So to
Right.
put it in philosophical terms, as a non-philosopher, their idea of society or population is floating. It's
Yeah.
detached from the actual constituents that ground it into reality, the individuals there. And then they also, what they sometimes do is they reify the population or they reify the society and make that the entity and they've forgotten all the roots of how you actually come to the concept of society or population. They've severed that link in their mind, and that makes it that's what causes this conflict between individual health and population health.
So population, the population does not have metaphysical existence, would you say? A community does not have metaphysical existence. A tribe does not have metaphysical existence. Would you agree?
Right. Those are all ways of conceptualizing a group of individuals who have some commonality. That this tribe, the Apache tribe or the Seneca tribe, those are people that have a certain way of life, live in a certain geographic region, but they're actually individual people that you're
Yeah.
now conveniently grouping together. It's just the way you would you know that
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
just a way it's just a convenient way to unit economize to make it easier to think about something because maybe it all applies to them as individual members of the Seneca tribe or the that's basically how I would think about it. It's not it doesn't and there are real things that it actually it's not an arbitrary grouping. It actually reflects the fact that there is some commonality there that you're finding and you're abstracting away the individual differences and you're saying, oh, these are all people like that. We group them together because it's convenient cognitively to think about it. But it doesn't have it. You can't then forget that you actually did that step, that you actually grouped them together. And that's what's happening is people are just severing that. And then they think, oh, the society above individuals, not knowing that society is individuals.
Okay, but now let me suppose a contagious uh, illness breaks out and the government has to make just has limited resources and has to make judgment calls about where to devote resources into, like, should we focus on quarantining higher population areas, like locating individuals who are affected in higher population areas or lower population areas. Everyone would say the obvious rational common sense thing to do is to focus on the higher population areas because more people are at risk of being infected than in the less dense areas. If you agree with that, someone might say, well, doesn't that mean that numbers matter? Protecting more people, the higher number matters. The higher number is more important than the smaller number. The protecting more people is more important than protecting fewer individuals. And doesn't that lean towards pro-collectivism? It's the number that matters.
No, I don't. I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that you're trying to save the most lives. That's not collectivism or individualism. That's just looking at the problem rationally. What's the way that we can save? We're in an emergency situation. What is the thing that's going to save the most lives? Not necessarily looking at it from collective. We're trying to preserve the collective. Like we're trying to save individual lives. What is the way to save the most individual lives. That's not collectivism. That's actually trying to save individual lives in an emergency situation where you can't save everybody. You have to make tough decisions, like a firefighter going into a building and one room has six
Okay.
people in it, and all he has to do is
Oh
open
yeah.
the door. Which door do you open? The one with one person or six persons? This is kind of this ethics of emergency, the trolley car problem that of what are you trying to, that's
I
not how
wasn't
you're
trying to.
looking at, but it's really, it's, I wouldn't say that this is collectivism if you're choosing to save more lives. You're trying to be
Right.
most impactful with your intervention. That's how I would think about it. And what's the most, if you've got a limited resource, whatever it might be, ability to quarantine, vaccines, antivirus, whatever it might be, you want to say, we want to make the most impact with this. And what's going to make the most impact? And that's how you'll target to whatever individuals you're going to target to based on
Yeah.
your goal of being most impactful at stopping this emergency or decreasing the damage that this emergency is causing.
Okay, I'll run with the premise. You're saying saving more lives is more rational than saving fewer lives, and that does not mean collectivism is right. Let me run with that. Um, what if saving more lives requires violating individual rights, locking people down, making them wear masks? Wouldn't you have to support that philosophically, since you're saying saving more lives is more rational than saving fewer?
No, I wouldn't necessarily support that because that already is kind of assuming that those measures are actually the correct measures.
Please, I would love for you to elaborate if you are willing.
So I
Yeah.
think that so if if using blanket isolation the way that you saw during COVID, that's just assuming that that actually saves the most lives versus targeted interventions where you're actually isolating only those that are infected and asking people to do things voluntarily and making sure that you have resources like the ability to test individuals in order to know who's contagious, that you're actually fortifying hospitals, that you're allowing hospitals to expand, that you're fortifying nursing homes. There are so many steps that you would do that would obviate the need to do something as blunt like that.
Well,
And
sorry.
no one is this type of, fully locking down towns and things that that was done because certain governors thought that was the only thing they could do and they wanted to save the most lives. And they were also explicitly privileging the short term over the long term. Because there were many of us saying you can't do this because you're going to increase problems in the long run, like cancer screenings are going to fall away. Uh, Surgeries can be postponed, but not indefinitely. Mental health can be postponed, but not indefinitely. And you're going to see some added increase at later. But people would say that's the long term. We don't care about the long term. We're trying to deal with the short term right now. So these, I think there's a false alternative being constructed that you do nothing or you do these draconian lockdowns.
Yeah.
And that's not the proper way to do it. The way to do it is to be proactive and take action before you even get to that stage. And that's just not what happened in many parts of the world. I would suggest that you look at places like Taiwan or South Korea where they were able to do this appropriately.
Thank you. Is quarantining specific? Does quarantine, sorry, does quarantining specific individuals who are infected and dangerous to others, does that count as a violation of their individual rights?
No, if you're isolating somebody that is a demonstrable threat to others, that's not violating their individual rights because they don't have the individual right to go around and infect people.
Right.
So no, if somebody has tuberculosis and you tell them to stay home and they start going out and ignoring that order, and you say we're going to put a police car in front of your house now because you've shown that you don't that you're not going to do this voluntarily, that's not a violation of their individual rights because they don't have an individual right to go out and infect people with tuberculosis or put other people at risk until and that situation continues until they're deemed non-infectious.
Okay. Thank you. And would a blanket lockdown be a violation of individual rights?
Yeah, if you are locking down people who pose no threat to others, yes, that would be a violation of their individual rights.
And the government may not. under a proper system. The government may not do that, even if it would save many, 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 many lives. Is that right?
Correct. That they advise it. They can make it voluntary, but it's not something they should do
Right.
with
Okay. Okay.
force, and it shouldn't even get to that place. But no, you
I'm with
cannot.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't constrain someone who poses no risk. What you would do is do it targeted. Flood the place with tests and say if you're positive, you need to stay home. If you're not, do this
Right.
other type of thing. So no, I think you can't restrict the movement.
Yes.
And it may have been the case that what happened in New York City, for example, when the hospitals were at the brink, that they needed to do some kind of circuit breaker. I understand why they did that, but it was because it was because they basically had no other tools to use. So I understand why they did it. I think it could have been more targeted and it didn't have to happen the way it did. But you can't look at
Okay.
I think people always draw these COVID examples, but they completely forget about January of 2020, February of 2020, and half of March of 2020, and they focus on the last part of March and going forward, not realizing that the whole thing was completely mismanaged from the very start, and that's why they were even in this situation. And you had a lot of people panic, and this is this blunt tool that they used because they didn't think
Oh,
we should use the sharper tools proactively. So this has now become this big major debate, but it shouldn't have even arisen if we actually had a proper policy early on and didn't have people
yeah.
evading
Yeah.
what COVID represented.
I fully get you and with you in if you had a proper policy, one that respected individual rights, there would not be nearly as much attention to the possibility and reality of lockdowns. I'm with you fully. Now, I raise that the scenario of lockdowns more hypothetically, not actually, but to explore the debate between individualism and collectivism. So would you endorse the following? From an individualist perspective, the government's job is to protect individual rights. Individual rights may not be violated, period. Within that constraint and within that primary job of the government, saving more lives is better than saving fewer lives, but that is secondary to the primary task of the government, which is to protect individual rights. And individuals may choose.
Yeah, that's how governments are constituted. But when you're talking about saving more lives, that's just a general principle. It doesn't necessarily have to be the government. It could be anybody
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in an emergency. What do you do? Or if you're, allocating drugs or something like that. It's not necessarily, I don't necessarily apply it the same
Well,
way to lockdown policy. I'm saying, okay, there's only you're trying to make your intervention most impactful. That's what you're trying to do in when I'm thinking about it from an infectious disease emergency management. That's not all government. That also could be private organizations thinking, okay, we're the Red Cross and we've got this many vaccines. How do we allocate
okay,
those most optimally? So I think it's a broader point about saving more lives than less,
okay,
and it applies to private institutions and individuals that are emergency responders, not necessarily always going to apply to government. So I don't like the pivot of that to lockdowns because it's a general principle that in the lockdown
yes, yes.
it kind of muddles the issue because it's assuming that it's assuming that the lockdown policy is the only policy, is the correct policy, is the one that you do, and there's a lot baked into that.
Okay, I follow you. Say the propriety of saving higher numbers over fewer numbers has a much wider context of application than lockdowns, and I did not mean to focus on lockdowns in any way that would be unnecessarily implying I don't know how to finish the sentence. Problems that you take it to be problems. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just think
Yeah.
about it this way: like, if the government wanted to save more lives from drunk driving, they would outlaw automobiles.
Yes.
Is that the
Yes.
right policy? No, that's not
No,
the right
because
policy
individual
because
right,
then
right,
there would
right.
be no ambulances either. So then
Yeah.
more people would die in their house from heart attacks and strokes. So I think you have to think about.
Well, but
Yeah, I think it's just some of these issues are more complex. They're not as
okay.
simple, and the simple solution, that it's not obvious that any of those things, such as isolating healthy people that weren't posing a risk to other people had a major benefit. It was a
But
blunt tool, and everybody knew it was a blunt tool that they were doing because they were panicked.
okay, I follow you. I work when you were talking about, well, if you disallow automobiles, then you'll have more people dying of heart attacks and strokes. Um, it seems like you were implicitly appealing to collectivism, to numbers, when from an individual's perspective, people have the right. Well, first of all, they're
No,
not
what I was
right.
talking about was short term versus long term, and that you have to look at all of the cascading consequences of your policy. So so going back to lockdowns and shutdowns,
Yeah.
everyone knew that they were going to increase rates that individuals who had needs for cancer screening were going to fall behind. That individuals who needed surgery were going to fall behind, and that was going to lead to a predictable increase in morbidity and mortality for those conditions. So it's not that not it, it's
Hmm.
yeah, I think you have to not conflate looking at the number or burden of a disease in a given geographic area as akin to collectivism. It's not. Understanding obviously you want to drive things when you're thinking about health outcomes, you want to optimize them and have the best numerical number for them, whether
Yes. Okay.
that's
Right. Right. Right.
so
I'm
that's
with.
not
Right.
collectivism. I think that collectivism means subordinating the individual to
Right.
the
Right.
collective.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
not the same thing as just as counting, saying that's not the same thing as just simple enumeration, saying it's better to have lower cancer deaths than higher cancer deaths in a given geographic area.
Yes. Within the context of protecting individual rights, many uh, people in the capacity of their career, in their capacity of their professions, should be and are rationally thinking about what maximizes outcomes, what promotes well-being for more people, what saves more lives rather than fewer. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean collectivism. It's not the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
That's what I'm
I'm
trying to
with you.
say.
I'm with you totally. Because of the primacy of the individual right to of the individual to live his life according to his judgment, and the primacy of the protection of individual rights on the part of the government. That is the core of what makes it an individualist approach as opposed to being collectivist, I would say.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. Did you want to? I have another, but
I was just going to say the standard of value is the individual, and you have to think of populations are made up of individuals, and governments are constituted by individuals to
yeah.
protect their individual rights, and that's what governments are doing. And it's very difficult now because government does a lot more than just protect individual
Yeah.
rights. They have so many
The,
other activities that have crowded out what would happen in a more capitalist society.
I would also say that the government's job uh, protecting as many lives as possible, I think, even within the constraints of individual rights, I'm already that's given for now in this context. I wonder if it's actually technically accurate as a positive value as opposed to protecting the freedom of individuals, because individuals may decide to drink themselves to death, drug themselves to death, which is their right to do.
Right, but this is in the
Right.
context of a contagious infectious
Yeah, yeah,
disease
yeah,
where you
yeah.
need to,
Okay,
where
okay,
it's not the same thing as a tornado or something like that. Even though
okay.
we have government agencies that do that, but I'm trying to think if you're thinking about when it comes to protection of individual
Thank
rights,
you.
that directly applies to contagious diseases in a way that doesn't to a weather emergency, for example.
The context you were speaking with the more saving more lives, protecting more lives is better than protecting fewer is within the context of the this contagious disease context. Yes. Okay. Good. I'm glad you.
But I mean, it's a general principle. If you're as I said, if you're a Red Cross worker, that's a general principle that you want that you might want to apply protect. So it doesn't always apply to government. There are other people that do rescue work and things like
Yes.
so
Okay. No, I'm with you. Yeah. Yes. It doesn't generalize ultimately and philosophically because, well, from an objectivist perspective, pro-individualist perspective, you should save your husband or wife over 10 strangers. So in
right.
that sense, right, right.
Yeah. There's but what I'm talking about is you're an aid worker for the Red Cross and you get put into
Yeah,
a
yeah.
disaster zone. You don't know anybody there. You have to make decisions.
Yes. Okay, so to the people who would say, in the context of, well, actually, you're open to a context much broader than contagious diseases. So let me just ask you more abstractly. To the people who would say, you sometimes have to restrict selfishness and individual freedom morally and legally for the sake of protecting the collective or the tribe or the population, what would your essential response be?
That there's something wrong with that scenario, that somebody's trying to violate somebody's individual rights there. It doesn't make sense to me that you would that scenario would ever happen if people were properly conceptualizing the problem. That there shouldn't be a scenario. These should be you shouldn't have to restrict someone's rights if they don't pose a risk to other individuals.
Mm,
That somehow there is a misconception of rights or freedom there that's happening, um, and it's probably from general kind of corruption in the thinking about what
okay.
altruism and it's no. So I think that that's improper to do that, and I think in many of these cases when you actually have a specific case, there's probably there is a better solution to the issue that you're trying to deal with
Okay.
than to do that.
Thank you. And if I can return to the we were talking about it's not in your rational self-interest to initiate force against other people, to put them at harm's risk. Um, Now, I could see someone saying here, okay, Amesh, I'm with you, that what you're saying makes sense, but there seems to be something missing. And what seems to be missing is you haven't said anything, and I haven't, Ayn Rand hasn't said anything about emotions and caring about people, feeling concern for other people. Is that totally irrelevant? I mean, for a normal human being, shouldn't there be some level of care he has for other people? And isn't that relevant to why he shouldn't be putting people at risk just human beings sh should naturally develop this basic level of emotional concern for others. Um, this person is saying that the idea of emotionally caring about other people and having that feeling of care be an essential component of moral behavior doesn't seem to factor into your thinking, Bach's thinking, Ayn Rand's thinking.
No, I'm talking about governmental policies for a contagious disease. The government, as such, shouldn't have emotions. I mean, the government
Uh,
should be driven by rules. And an individual,
yes, yes.
yes. So for an individual, yes, there's emotions play a role there. But if your emotions are going to derive from your evaluation and value of that person and understanding of that person as a human being that has rights, yes, emotions play a role that you care about you care about that person, so you don't want them to be sick or injured. That plays a role in it, but I think that's probably secondary. Then you don't want to violate their individual rights, but that so I think the things you end up in the same place.
Oh,
But
because from an objectivist perspective, emotions are influenced by your value judgments, and we're talking about I mean, what is of value? Um, your life, other people's right to live their lives, consent, and not initiating force. Yeah, so those are important values that emotions will be sensitized to if you understand those as values. I think.
yes, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Are you able to comment? The fact that you're working in bioterrorism interests me. You work in pandemic policy. You work in bioterrorism. I don't have a specific question. It's more of a could you comment generally on how to protect people from that in a way that's individual rights uh, protecting as opposed to a more collectivist approach.
Well, I think what you're trying to do when this is a government function, the prevention of bioterrorism, that is trying to prevent bad actors from doing bad things. And those bad things are going to injure individuals. That's going to violate their individual rights. So that's making sure that governments have the ability to detect and deter and understand these threats and have countermeasures available if this happens. And we saw this happen in 2001 with the anthrax attacks when anthrax was sent through the U.S. Postal Service. So that's what prevention of bioterrorism, or that's what the bioterrorism angle of the work is that this is a communicable disease or a threat agent, might not necessarily have to be communicable from person to person, but somebody's getting exposed to
Mm.
some sort of microorganism that's going to harm them. and they're being exposed deliberately with the intention of harming them to cause death, destruction, disruption. And that's a role for the government, just the way prevention of nuclear terrorism is, or even standard terrorism using, old-fashioned guns. That's the same. It's a criminal enterprise, and it's the government developing programs to deal with that issue. The interest of me is that it involves infectious diseases and infectious microorganisms. So it's an area where infectious disease intersects with national security, and there's interesting problems there that I've been interested in thinking about. How do you prepare for these things? How do you make sure you have countermeasures? How do you detect them because they're rare? What happens? How do you coordinate all of the response? All of that becomes very interesting because it is basically an act of war, but a very specific type of war, the use of a biological weapon, which requires subject matter expertise that's different than when you're dealing with
Yeah.
ordinary forms of war.
Um, when did you discover when did you discover the ideas of Ayn Rand and what attracted you to them? If I can just, I know that's a sudden pivot, but it came up for me in the moment. Yeah.
So I think I'd heard of her by the time I was in high school, maybe, and I know that my English teacher in 12th grade had a poster for the Fountainhead essay contest on the wall. I didn't enter it, but I saw it. I knew that there was a book called The Fountainhead. I knew that there was an author named Ayn Rand, and that was around 1992, 1993. And then around 1994, I was spending the summer in New York City, and I just kept getting um, exposures in odd ways. Like I would be in someone's house and I would see Atlas Shrugged on the shelf, or I would be on the subway and somebody was reading Atlas Shrugged, or I would read a magazine article about a celebrity who would mention an Ayn Rand book. And there was enough of those hits that happened. I said, well, I kind of want to see what this is about. So I went and to like the first bookstore I saw and I just picked up a book and I started to read it. And then I went home that weekend and my dad saw me reading the book, and he said, "Well, there's some downstairs in our. I have some of those books downstairs too, which I didn't know. He's all these books in our basement, and there's it's just kind of an eclectic mix of books. And there was a copy of Atlas Shrugged sitting there, and a copy of Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal sitting in my basement my whole life. That was there. So that's basically how I did it. And I was, you know, ironically, the first book, or not ironically, paradoxically, the first book I read of hers was The Romantic Manifesto, which was a little bit hard to read and understand at that point. But then I read Atlas Shrugged, and I think what attracted to me what was, the grand scale of how she understood how the world works, and I saw that in Atlas Shrugged right away. That she was explaining things in Atlas Shrugged that kind of had puzzled me, or,
Huh.
and sort of making real certain thoughts that I might have had myself, or implicitly, and I'm not, it's things that I might have been inkling towards. She made very real for me, and gave me kind of the vision to be able to think about the world, think about what's going on in the world, think about my own career aspirations, and think about my life. That's kind of what drew me into it. It was just the explanatory power of the ideas.
I, you're the only objectivist I know whose first exposure to Ayn Rand was the Romantic Manifesto. That's very interesting. Very interesting. That's cool.
Well,
Yeah.
it's because I had read an article, I think in GQ or Esquire, and that was mentioned.
Oh
And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
so I knew I had that one in my mind, and I just said, I'll start with that one because that was mentioned. Even though I knew that Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead existed, I just picked that one up because it was in this article that I had read. So I said, I'll just try that one first. And it looked small, and I just saw it sitting there, so I just said, I'll
Huh.
just get it.
Okay. Did you have philosophical views before getting into Ayn Rand, and were they contrary views? Did you have like this shock moment, or were you already kind of aligned implicitly and
I
then
think I was aligned implicitly. I went to Catholic school from K through 8, and I definitely had rejected religion at a very young age. Both my parents were basically, in essence, atheists. So I grew up around so I had a lot of exposure to philosophical ideas by going to a Catholic school. And I think I was on politics. I sort of was leaning more towards capitalism. I don't think I had it, articulated or formulated in that way. Um, and I definitely was somebody that was really enamored by science and rationality and reasoning and thinking about the mind and the power of the mind in terms of
Mm.
like people that I would do reports on in school, like Isaac Newton and Louis Pasteur and all of these people that I was kind of gravitating towards. So I think that yeah, so I don't think I had antithetical views or anything like that. I think I was um, aligned, but not necessarily explicitly.
How did you g- get into your career? What passions arose? Were you first interested in being a physician, primary care, and then you got interested in infectious diseases, or were you straight interested in politics, or could you walk us through some of that?
So I didn't necessarily, I knew I was probably going to, I was kind of always kind of toying with the idea of being a physician. Both my parents are physicians. So that
Mm.
was always something I was exposed to. But I knew that if I want, but I also was very interested in finance and business and other things as well. So I didn't initially, I kind of went into college double majoring in biology and industrial management at Carnegie Mellon, and I switched. I dropped the biology double major. I finished with a degree in industrial management, and then quickly after graduating, I realized that I wanted to go into medicine. And when I went into medicine, I knew I wanted to do infectious disease. That's all I wanted to do. And going back into my childhood, there were books about Louis Pasteur that I was really obsessed with when I was a small child on the discovery of the rabies vaccine. And I grew up at a time when HIV/AIDS first emerged. My mom is a lung doctor, and she was taking care of some of those HIV patients who had really bad
Mm.
pneumonias. And I remember hearing about it, I remember reading about it, and I just thought it was so fascinating that this virus that no one had ever heard of before was now causing all this disruption, all this political turmoil. So in my mind, I can remember thinking, if I go into medicine, I want to do infectious disease because I love all the detective work. I love how infectious disease how it correlates with just this conversation is evidence of the power of infectious disease or the breadth of infectious disease because it brings up all these philosophical questions in a way that probably cardiology wouldn't or primary care wouldn't. Because
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
infectious disease has a cascading impact on all parts of society because it touches on anthropology, geography, sociology, politics. All of that plays a role in national security. All of that plays that there's integration or infectious disease has cascading impacts on all of those in a way that cardiology doesn't, or the way that
Mm.
ophthalmology doesn't.
Would you say that infection? Thank you for explaining those personal details and sharing about you're interested in detective work. You're interested in the power of these infectious diseases, and you're interested in exploring them and understanding them and combating them. Very clear. Thank you. Do you think that infectious diseases in the philosophical war for objectivism, the individualism versus collectivism, selfishness versus unselfishness, freedom versus controls. Do you think that the phenomenon of infectious diseases is at least rhetorically one of the ammo on the side of the pro altruism, pro collectivism camp? Because see, you have to limit freedom, see, you have to limit selfishness, right?
Well, I think they use it because it's a convenient example because they've misconceptualized the idea, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's definitely the idea that infectious disease spread from person to person because they're contagious. It involves your relationship with others in a way that heart attacks don't. So that's it's a natural way that they would look at
yeah.
and public health from its inception has been about the control of communicable diseases. And a lot of this type of thinking of community health, population health derives from public health, which at its core was in its founding was about preventing people from getting the Black Death and using that type of police power of the state for quarantining ships and quarantining travelers and isolating towns. That's where it all comes from. So it's natural that they would look at infectious disease. But again, it's because that's the only field of medicine where you're dealing with something that goes from one person to another person. Heart attacks are not contagious. Cataracts not contagious. So you can't.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's going to be something that's it naturally goes to that because it brings up those issues because you're talking about one person's relationship with another.
Amesh, Dr. Adalja has mentioned several times conceptualization. I want to just highlight in Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, a major aspect of her philosophy is her epistemology, her theory of concept formation. And according to objectivism, rationality, thinking, is the primary moral virtue, and that involves forming the right concepts and thinking the right way and conceptualizing the right way. I think that's one of the most important aspects of objectivism that I hope spreads through the culture, that people start not only thinking as opposed to just reacting on feeling, but thinking and trying to question how they conceptualize the problems they're dealing with. Because Amish has pinged the importance of how are you conceptualizing the problem? How are you conceptualizing the problem? Are you doing it in a way that assumes collectivism as opposed to individualism? Okay. In your work, are you a philosopher at all in your work, or is it more? I know you studied objectivism at the Ayn Rand Institute and you presented at objectivist conferences. Is there a philosopher part of your career, or is that mainly more of a side thing, and then your main thing is this health, medicine, healthcare, bioterrorism, healthcare policy?
Well, I do take a philosophical approach to these ideas, and I have to say they're integrated, but I don't write on the philosophy of medicine. I have done some things in the philosophy of science relating to concepts that apply in infectious disease. So, for example, in the future, hopefully a paper will come out that I co-authored with Corinne Bloch, who's a PhD philosopher and a PhD biologist, who is at Marquette University. We wrote a paper about the concept of prion, which is an infectious protein that's responsible for diseases like mad cow disease, and how that conceptual development occurred. So that's probably the most explicitly philosophical work I've done. But and obviously, the philosophy part of that paper is almost is heavily derived from Dr. Bloch, and the scientific part of it is more me. But that was a collaboration that was explicitly philosophical. I've been involved in certain things regarding political philosophy as well, in terms of individual rights in medicine and free market medicine principles. I've done work in that area as well. But the main thrust of my career is in infectious disease and pandemic preparedness. And yes, philosophy integrates because it imbues everything. And I try to take a philosophical approach and really drill into the essentials in a way that maybe some people don't do as much in my field. But I think, I don't consider myself a philosopher or anything or anything close to
No,
that.
yeah, right. Would you say, I'm trying to, your mission, if you have one, is your mission protect the world from infectious disease and bioterrorism, protect Americans, protect individuals? Anything like a statement about your calling here?
I want
I
to be
don't
the best I want to be the best infectious disease doctor that I can be. That's what I want to be.
be the best infectious disease doctor you can be.
Yes, and all the implications of that. So yes, I'm very interested in how I like being on the forefront of how humans about of how human civilization fights against infectious diseases. I like that idea that I'm defending civilization when
Mm,
I'm working or not necessarily defending it, but promoting civilization, promoting humans doing better, living longer, getting the ability, having the opportunity to do great things by keeping these infectious diseases at bay. I like that idea as well. But ideally, I just want to be the best infectious disease doctor I can be, to continue expanding my knowledge, continue to ask new questions, continue to be able to understand these new concepts that are coming from my field, and being able to try and push it forward so that
yeah.
it actually leads
Well,
to something where human civilization advances.
you want to be the best infectious disease doctor you can be, not to help other people, but because it's selfish. It's what gives you pleasure and joy and happiness. Would that be accurate, or would you want to modify
Yeah,
that? Yeah.
yes, I think that's accurate. But anytime you do something that's a productive endeavor, it's going to help other people. But you can't have a
Right.
destructive. So that's kind of a non-issue. I want to, it gives me great pleasure and intellectual stimulation. That's why I do infectious disease.
Yes, it's enjoyment and win-win. Your pursuit of your selfish interest and your enjoyment is a win for you, and it's a win for other people, right? Win-win. And
So
that
that's
just
how,
go.
I mean, any productive adventure, any productive endeavor, any career will always be win-win if it's done appropriately.
So selfishness is good. The individual is primary and has metaphysical existence. The collective does not exist per se. The society does not exist per se. Population health does not exist, is not accurate per se. Pursue your selfish interest, enjoyment, any productive endeavor is win-win. I'm just reflecting
Yes.
some. Okay. Dr. Adalja, Amesh, any uh I'm interested in marketing you. So anything, is there anything you want to say to anyone about what you're up to, what you want people to be interested, how to find you, what anything you want to share with anyone for any reason? Yeah.
You can find me on all the social media platforms. My handle is usually at Amesh AA, so AMESH AA. I'm on X and Blue Sky and Instagram. I also have a YouTube channel. That's just Dr. Amesh Adalja, where I've been having some videos posted about me talking about infectious disease concepts or infectious disease that's in the news. So you can, and I have a Substack. I don't update it that often, and a blog, Tracking Zebra. But they're both called the same thing. That you could find me there as well.
Right. Oh, thank you. Any practical tips for individuals on health and protecting themselves from diseases? Any just quick practical tips?
Stay up to date with the recommended vaccines. Wash your hands a lot. Just recognize that there's lots of infectious disease threats out there, but there's lots of tools that make them easier to deal with. So use those tools to help you navigate your life and pursue your values in a world in which there's many infectious disease threats that you could face when you travel to exotic places and also when you travel to the grocery store.
Sounds good to me. Dr. Amish Adalja, thank you for this very pleasurable, win-win, enjoyable chat and for being my Valentine of the moment. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.